I simply refused to babysit my elderly neighbor for free this weekend. So her son actually carried her, with a broken leg, straight into my office lobby to make a massive scene. Holding a forged volunteer caregiver agreement, he wept bitterly in front of all my colleagues, accusing me of being cold-blooded and heartless. He claimed that my going out on a date had caused his mother to fall and get severely injured, and he even demanded $50,000 in compensation. The judging stares of onlookers and the vicious cyberbullying on social media rushed at me like a tsunami. He thought I was just a young, helpless girl who would quietly swallow this bitter pill to protect her job and reputation. He thought public pressure would force me to become their free nanny, all to satisfy his fake sense of filial piety. Too bad for him, he messed with the wrong woman. Instead of backing down, I called the police on the spot and demanded a forensic handwriting analysis. Step by step, I ripped off his hypocritical mask, exposing how he used his own mother as a cash cow. Trying to guilt-trip me? I'll use the law to make sure he rots in a cell. When the front desk urgently paged me down to the lobby, I could hear the hysterical screaming before the elevator doors even opened. Someone help me. Look at what the younger generation has become. So heartless. She signed an agreement. She promised to look after my mother this weekend, but she bailed. My poor mother broke her leg and laid on the cold floor for 3 hours. The elevator doors slid open, revealing a lobby packed with people. Security guards, co-workers, janitors, and even a few strangers holding up their phones, live streaming the whole thing. Right in the center of the lobby lay a stretcher. An elderly woman with white hair lay on it, her leg wrapped in a thick plaster cast. Her eyes were tightly shut, and her face was deathly pale. It was my neighbor Grace. Kneeling beside the stretcher, sobbing with tears and snot running down his face, was her son Pierce. Pierce was wearing a faded, washed-out shirt, holding a piece of paper high in the air. The moment he saw me step out, he sprang up from the floor and pointed a shaking finger at me, screaming, "Amanda, you finally showed your face. Look at what you did to my mother." Instantly, every gaze in the room stabbed into me like knives. I didn't flinch. Stepping firmly in my high heels, I walked toward him, one deliberate step at a time. "Pierce, what kind of crazy stunt are you pulling here?" My voice wasn't loud, but in the spacious lobby, it cut through the noise with absolute clarity. Pierce sneered, slamming the paper onto the reception desk next to him. "Me? Crazy? Amanda, this is the volunteer caregiver agreement you signed with your own hand. It states clearly right here. You promised to look after my mother every single weekend, 24/7. Last Saturday you ignored my calls just so you could go out on some hot date. My mother wanted a glass of water, tried to get out of bed herself, and shattered her hip. You are going to take responsibility today. Pay up $50,000 for her medical bills, or I will make sure you get fired from this company." The crowd immediately erupted into hushed whispers. "She looks so pretty. How could she be so cruel? How can you break a promise like that? An old lady almost died." "Exactly. Abandoning an elder just for a date? That's disgusting." I stared coldly at Pierce. His face was slightly distorted with a sick sense of triumph. I could see the greedy, calculating glint in his eyes. He assumed that by making a scene at my workplace, I would desperately hand over the cash just to save my job and reputation. I picked up the so-called agreement from the desk. The paper was crisp and new, the form poorly formatted. It indeed had my name, phone number, and apartment number printed on it. And at the very bottom, there was my signature. The handwriting was a decent imitation, but I knew with absolute certainty that I had never signed any such thing. I laid the paper down, pulled out my phone, and dialed 911. "Hi, I need to report an incident. I am at the lobby of Parkview Tower. A man is using a forged document to extort $50,000 from me. He is currently disrupting a place of business and causing a public nuisance. Yes, the suspect is right here. Please dispatch officers immediately." I hung up and looked back at Pierce. The smug grin on his face instantly froze. "You. Why did you call the cops?" Pierce's voice wavered, but he quickly tried to bluff his way through. "Fine. Let the cops come. Let them see what a treacherous snake you are. My mom's broken leg is a fact. And your signature is a fact." I ignored him. Instead, I turned my gaze to Grace on the stretcher. Her eyelids fluttered violently, but she kept them squeezed shut, terrified to look at me. "Mrs. Grace," I said, my voice ice cold, "are you really going to keep pretending to be asleep? Pierce carried you here like some cheap prop just to extort money. Do you feel proud of this?" Grace's fingers tightened instantly around the edge of the blanket on the stretcher. Pierce quickly stepped in front of her, blocking my view. "Amanda, stop harassing my mother. She is in no condition to deal with your abuse." I let out a cold laugh. "Can't handle stress? Yet you carried her into a chaotic, noisy lobby. Are you trying to get her medical help? Or are you parading her around like a circus freak?" The murmuring in the crowd died down. A few people started to realize something was off. 10 minutes later, the police arrived. The responding officer took one look at the scene, his brow furrowing deeply. What's going on here? Who called the police? I stepped forward. I did. I pointed at Pierce. This man brought a forged document to my office to extort $50,000 from me. Pierce immediately started yelling. She's lying through her teeth. She signed this herself. Now she's just trying to dodge her responsibility. The officer took the agreement, examined it, and then looked at me. Are you sure this isn't your signature? I am positive. I stared straight into Pierce's eyes, pronouncing every word clearly. I am requesting a forensic handwriting analysis. If the test proves I signed it, I will pay every single penny of that $50,000. But if it's a forgery, Pierce, extorting 50 grand is grand larceny. That's enough to put you behind bars for a long, long time. Pierce's face drained of color instantly. He took an involuntary step backward. You, stop trying to threaten me. My mom's leg is broken. That's a fact. The officer cut him off. All right, that's enough. Since this involves potential forgery and extortion, both of you need to come down to the station. As for the lady, call an ambulance and get her to a hospital. This is ridiculous. Pierce panicked. Officer, my mom needs me. I have to stay with her at the hospital. I can't go to the station. I glared at him. Didn't you just say I was her 24/7 weekend caregiver? Why does she suddenly need you now? Pierce choked on his words, unable to reply. The ambulance arrived quickly and took Grace away. Pierce, looking like a defeated dog, was put into the back of a police cruiser. I requested a few hours off from my manager and got into another cruiser. I knew this war had only just begun. At the station, the harsh fluorescent lights beat down on Pierce's face. Sweat was pouring down his forehead. The detective slammed the agreement onto the table. Pierce, let's try this again. Did Amanda sign this paper or not? Pierce grit his teeth, still trying to play tough. Yes, she signed it. It was during the senior care outreach event organized by the neighborhood association last month. She signed it right in front of me. Sitting across from him, I watched his pathetic performance with cold amusement. Fine, I said. Detective, I want to proceed with the handwriting analysis. Furthermore, I want to pull the security footage from the community center from last month. If it was an official neighborhood association event, there must be records, right? Pierce's hands began to tremble. He swallowed hard, and his aggressive attitude suddenly flipped into a pathetic plea. Amanda, come on, we're neighbors. We see each other every day. Do you really have to be this cruel? My mom has always been so sweet to you. She even brought you homemade apple pie once. Even if you didn't sign it, she broke her leg. Would it kill you to just help out with some medical bills? I laughed out of sheer anger. Pierce, do you think the whole world is your mother and has to cater to your whims? Your mother brought me dessert once, and the very next day, you came over to borrow my car. When I said no, you went on to our neighborhood Snapchat group and called me a selfish bitch. You call that being sweet? You forged my signature, crashed my office, and tried to ruin my career and reputation. And you call that being a neighbor? I stood up, leaning over the table, pressing him hard. Let me tell you something. You won't get a single dime of that $50,000. On top of that, I'm suing you for forgery, extortion, and defamation. I am going to destroy you. The detective tapped the table. All right, Amanda, take a seat. The detective then turned to Pierce. Pierce, let me make this clear. Once the forensic handwriting analysis is done, if it's a forgery, the charges become much more severe. Tell the truth now, while you still have a chance. Pierce's psychological defense finally shattered. He buried his face in his hands, slumping miserably into his chair. Okay, I had someone else sign it. The interrogation room went dead silent. I quietly turned on the voice recorder on my phone. Who signed it? Pierce didn't dare to look at me. I paid someone online to forge it. Why did you forge my signature? Because the neighborhood association was holding a contest for the Community Angel Award. First place gets a $5,000 grant. The rules state you need to submit active volunteer logs for senior care. I couldn't find anyone, so I used your info. I stared at him, feeling utterly repulsed. For a $5,000 prize, he sold out his neighbor's private information. For a $50,000 extortion plot, he dragged his injured mother to a corporate lobby. This man was absolute scum. The detective finished writing the report and slid it over for Pierce to sign. Pierce, you are being charged with forgery and attempted grand larceny. You're being booked. Pierce snapped his head up, eyes wide with disbelief. Booked? No, I can't go to jail. My mom is still in the hospital. Who is going to take care of her? I looked at him coldly. Why don't you use that $5,000 prize money to hire a nurse? Oh wait, now that you're going to jail, I guess you won't be getting that money anyway. Pierce glared at me, his eyes filled with venomous rage. Amanda, you'll pay for this. Just wait until I get out. I'm coming for you. I met his gaze, refusing to back down even an inch. I'll be waiting. The air in the lobby of Parkview Tower, had cleared of Pierce's dramatic wailing, but the residual stench of gossip still hung thick over the polished marble floors. When I returned to the office the following Monday, the silence that greeted me in the elevator was loud. People who usually offered polite nods suddenly found the floor numbers or their phone screens incredibly fascinating. My co-worker, Brenda, a woman whose primary hobby was tracking office politics, like a bookkeeper, was waiting by the coffee machine when I walked in. He offered a look of deep, artificial sympathy that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, Amanda," she whispered, her voice pitched perfectly so the three people at the nearest desks could hear. "Are you holding up okay? I saw the video on the Orenburg Community Forum over the weekend. It didn't look great. Some of the comments are being so cruel." "I'm fine, Brenda," I said, setting my mug down under the espresso dispenser. "And you shouldn't worry about the comments. People who spend their weekends screaming on local forums usually don't have the mental capacity to check their facts." Brenda's fake smile twitched. "Well, of course, but Mr. Sterling wants to see you in his office right away. Thanks for the heads up." I didn't rush. I waited for my double shot of espresso to finish dripping, took a slow, deliberate sip, and then walked down the carpeted hallway to the corner office. Mr. Sterling, our division director, was a man whose entire life was governed by risk management and corporate optics. He was staring at his laptop screen when I knocked on the glass door. He looked up, his brow furrowed with the heavy, paternal disappointment that middle managers love to weaponize. "Amanda, sit down please." I sat in the black leather chair opposite his desk, my posture straight, my espresso held steady in my lap. "I assume you know why we're having this conversation," Sterling began, spinning a gold pen between his fingers. "The scene in the lobby on Friday. It was highly disruptive. Several clients were in the building. Furthermore, my assistant flagged several videos circulating on local social media platforms. The name of our firm is clearly visible on the building directory in the background." He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "We value our employees' private lives, Amanda, but when that private life spills into our corporate lobby and begins to affect our public image, we have to consider the team's overall well-being. Perhaps a brief, unpaid leave of absence while you sort out this domestic dispute." It was the classic corporate soft shoe. They wanted me out of sight so they wouldn't have to deal with the minor inconvenience of a fabricated scandal. I set my coffee mug on his desk with a quiet clink. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice cool and even, "I appreciate your concern for the company's image, which is why I'm sure you'll be glad to know that the situation is already resolved." I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder containing the official police booking slip, the incident report number, and a copy of the written confession Pierce had signed at the precinct. I slid the papers across the mahogany desk. On Friday, the suspect, Pierce Higgins, was arrested and charged with forgery, attempted grand larceny, and public defamation. I explained, pointing to the seal at the top of the page. He has already confessed under interrogation that the volunteer caregiver agreement was a complete fabrication, signed by a professional forger he hired online. Sterling's hand froze over his gold pen. He picked up the police report, his eyes scanning the official stamps and the clear, bold letters of the confession. He confessed? Sterling muttered, his defensive posture suddenly collapsing. "Yes. And as you can see from the case file, the Orenburg Police Department is currently handling the prosecution," I said, leaning forward slightly. "Now, regarding the videos circulating online, my lawyer has already drafted cease and desist letters to the administrators of those forums. We are preparing to file civil defamation suits against anyone who posted or shared those clips without verifying the facts." I paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable. If Parkview Group were to force me into an unpaid leave of absence based on a verified criminal extortion plot of which I am the victim, it would look very much like the company is penalizing an employee for reporting a crime to the police. My lawyer has advised me that such an action would make the firm complicit in the civil damages. Sterling's face went through a rapid series of pale transitions. The unpaid leave was instantly off the table. "Well, of course, Amanda," he said, his voice rising a full octave as he quickly slid the police report back to me. We had no intention of penalizing you. We just wanted to ensure you had the time you needed to handle this. If you're fully vindicated, then there's absolutely no issue. Parkview Group stands behind our employees." "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," I said, taking my papers and my coffee. "I'll be at my desk if you need anything else." As I walked out of his office, I caught Brenda watching me from behind her partition. I offered her a thin, polite smile. She immediately looked down at her keyboard, her fingers typing with frantic, silent speed. The battle at the office was won, but the digital war was still raging. By Monday afternoon, a local public interest page called Orenburg Watch, a notorious tabloid account run by anonymous administrators who made their living off neighbor shaming and local outrage, had posted a 30-second clip of the lobby incident. The video was edited with malicious precision. It showed Pierce kneeling by his mother's stretcher, sobbing hysterically, while I stood a few feet away, looking tall, cold, and entirely unmoved. The caption read, "Parkview Group employee Amanda K. leaves her elderly neighbor with a shattered hip to go on a weekend date, then calls the cops on the grieving son when he asks for help with medical bills. Is this the future of our community?" The comments section was a toxic swamp of righteous indignation. Disgusting. She looks like a monster. What's her full name? I hope she gets fired. Parkview Group needs to let her go immediately. How does she sleep at night? That poor old woman. I sat at my kitchen island that evening, scrolling through the comments with a cold, analytical eye. My childhood friend, Sarah, called me 3 times, her voice trembling when I finally picked up. "Amanda, have you seen the posts? People are sharing your LinkedIn profile in the comment section. They're calling the office line. You need to lock down your accounts." "I've already locked them, Sarah," I said, my voice steady as I poured myself a cup of tea. "Don't panic. This is exactly what Pierce wanted. He wanted to use the internet as a blunt instrument to break me, but the internet is stupid. It only knows what it's shown." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to show them the rest of the story," I said. The next morning, I met with my attorney, Richard Cole, at his downtown office. Richard was a sharp, gray-haired man who specialized in civil litigation and corporate defamation. He looked at the screenshots I had gathered with a look of quiet, professional disgust. "They didn't even blur your face," Richard noted, tapping his glasses against the desk. "And the page administrator didn't reach out to you or the police for comment before publishing. This is a textbook case of reckless disregard for the truth." "I don't just want the video down, Richard," I said. "I want a public, pinned retraction. And I want the administrators of Orenburg Watch to pay for every hour of billable time we spend on this." "We can do that," Richard smiled, a predatory gleam in his eye. "In fact, since Pierce has already confessed to the police, we have the ultimate shield. Let's draft the response." By 3 p.m., Richard had sent a formal legal notice to the host servers and the direct email of Orenburg Watch. Along with the cease and desist, we released a comprehensive public statement on my personal page, tagging the local news outlets and the community forums. The statement didn't contain any emotional pleas or defensive arguments. It was a cold, brutal presentation of evidence. I uploaded 1. A high-resolution scan of the forged agreement next to my actual signature from my state passport, highlighting the obvious differences in stroke and slant. 2. The official booking sheet from the Orenburg Police Department showing Pierce Higgins's mugshot and his charges of forgery and grand larceny. 3. A redacted copy of his signed confession, where he explicitly admitted to paying a third-party service $50 to forge my name so he could win a community grant. At the bottom of the post, I added a single, clear sentence. A civil defamation lawsuit has been filed against the administrators of Orenburg Watch and the individual social media users who participated in the dissemination of personal information and threats. All proceeds from the litigation will be donated to local elder abuse prevention charities. The reaction was instantaneous. The internet's moral outrage, which had been directed at me for 3 days, turned on its heel like a panicked herd of cattle. Within 20 minutes, the post on Orenburg Watch was deleted. An hour later, a new post appeared on their page, a plain black square with a pinned, formal apology written by their legal counsel, expressing deep regret for the misinformation and confirming they had deactivated the comments on all related threads. The toxic comments on the community forums vanished, replaced by users frantically deleting their previous statements to avoid being included in the civil suit. I closed my laptop and took a deep, clear breath. The digital mob had retreated, but I wasn't done. I still needed to figure out how Grace had actually broken her leg and why Pierce had been so desperate to blame me. Our apartment building was an old, 5-story brick structure with high ceilings and squeaky hardwood floors. I lived in Unit 402, and Grace lived directly across the hall in 401. The hallway was usually quiet, smelling faintly of the cabbage Grace loved to boil and the cheap pine cleaner the building manager used on the stairs. On Wednesday evening, I stood in front of my door, looking up at the small dark dome of the Ring camera I had installed above my lintel a year ago. Our building didn't have official security cameras in the residential hallways, only in the main lobby, so I had paid for my own, angling it so it captured my doorway and a portion of the shared corridor leading to the stairs. I sat down on my sofa, opened the security app on my tablet, and began to pull the archived footage from last Saturday, the night Grace supposedly fell because I ignored her calls to go on a date. The date on the file was October 14th. I skipped the footage forward to 7 p.m., the time I had left my apartment, wearing a blue silk dress, heading down the stairs to meet my dinner date. On the screen, the hallway was quiet until 8:15 p.m. The elevator doors at the end of the hall slid open, and Pierce Higgins appeared. He was stumbling. Even on the low-resolution night vision footage, it was obvious he was highly intoxicated. He was clutching a bottle of cheap whiskey in one hand, his jacket hanging off one shoulder. He approached Unit 401 fumbling with his keys for nearly 3 minutes, cursing loudly under his breath. When he finally got the door open, he didn't go in quietly. The audio from my camera was incredibly sharp. Through the thin wood of our doors, the sound of a violent argument erupted. "You old leech!" Pierce's voice screamed, the words slurred but thick with rage. "Where is the check? I know the pension came in yesterday. Give it to me." "Pierce, no." Grace's voice was high, trembling with a fragile, elderly terror. "That's for my medicine. I can't give you any more. The landlord said we're behind on the rent." "I don't care about the rent. I have a game tonight. I need the cash." A loud hollow crash echoed through the hallway, the sound of furniture being overturned, and then a sharp, agonizing shriek of pain from Grace. "My leg! Pierce, my leg! Oh God, help me, I think it's broken." On the video, the door to Unit 401 remained open. At 9:15 p.m., Pierce walked out of the apartment. He wasn't stumbling anymore, he looked panicked. He pulled his collar up, closed the door behind him, and locked it from the outside. He left his mother lying on the floor, in the dark, with a shattered hip. He didn't call an ambulance. He didn't call the neighbors. He simply ran down the stairs, leaving the building to go to his poker game. My camera recorded the quiet hallway for the next 14 hours. Through the thick walls, if you listened closely, you could hear the faint, exhausted whimpering of an old woman crying for help in the dark. But the hallway was empty, and no one heard her. Pierce didn't return until 11:30 a.m. the next morning. He looked hungover, his clothes rumpled. He unlocked the door, went inside, and 5 minutes later, the sirens of the ambulance echoed down the street. I sat on my sofa, my hands shaking as I stared at the screen of my tablet. He hadn't found his mother injured after a long, tragic weekend of neglect by a neighbor. He had pushed her, or caused her to fall during a drunken rage, and then locked her in the apartment for over half a day to cover his tracks and find a way to shift the blame. He had used his mother's agonizing pain as a lottery ticket, waiting until Monday morning to print the forged agreement and stage the scene in my office lobby. I copied the video file onto a secure flash drive, put on my coat, and headed directly to the local police precinct. The hospital smells of antiseptic, old floor wax, and the metallic tang of institutional food. Orenburg General was a busy public facility, and Grace had been placed in a shared ward on the 3rd floor, her bed separated from the hallway by nothing more than a thin, yellow privacy curtain. I walked past the nurse's station, my boots clicking softly on the linoleum. When I pulled the curtain aside, Grace was lying there, her white hair spread across the flat hospital pillow. Her leg was elevated in a heavy plaster cast, a series of 4 tubes running into her bruised, paper-thin skin. She looked incredibly old, her face sunken, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. When she saw me enter, her whole body flinched. She tried to pull the thin hospital blanket up to her chin, her fingers trembling. "Amanda," she whispered, her voice cracking with fear. What are you doing here?" Pierce said. "Pierce said you were going to jail." "Pierce lied to you, Grace," I said, sitting in the hard plastic chair beside her bed. I didn't raise my voice, but I didn't offer her any comfort either. "Pierce is currently in a holding cell at the 4th precinct. He's been denied bail." Grace's eyes filled with tears, her mouth working silently for several seconds, before she let out a low, pathetic sob. He's my boy, Amanda. He didn't mean any harm. We're so behind on the rent. He said if you paid the $50,000, we could buy a small house in the suburbs. He said you were rich. He told you to lie on that stretcher in my office lobby, didn't he?" I asked. She didn't answer. She just turned her head away, her tears soaking into the pillowcase. "He carried you into a public building with a broken hip and paraded you around like a circus freak so he could extort money from me," I said, my voice cold and steady. "And you went along with it. You shut your eyes and pretended to be unconscious because you wanted the money too." I had no choice. She suddenly cried out, turning back to me, her face contorted with a desperate, weak anger. "He's my son. Am I supposed to let him go to jail? He's all I have left. He's the one who broke your leg, Grace." The ward went dead silent. The elderly woman in the bed next to Grace's stopped rustling her newspaper. Grace's eyes widened, her pupils contracting into tiny black pinpricks. I fell, she stammered, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. I fell. Trying to get a glass of water. No, you didn't, I said. I pulled out my tablet, opened the video file from my Ring camera, and set it on the bedside table, turning the screen toward her. I hit play. The audio of Pierce's drunken screaming filled the small cubicle. Grace listened to her own voice crying out in pain, followed by the sound of her son locking the door and walking away, leaving her to scream in the dark for 14 hours. By the time the video ended, Grace was shaking so violently the floor stand beside the bed was rattling. I have already given this footage to the detective handling the case, I said, leaning closer to her. The district attorney is currently revising the charges against Pierce. He is no longer just being charged with forgery and attempted grand larceny. He is being charged with domestic abuse, elder abuse, and felony neglect. No, she gasped, clutching her chest. Please, don't do this to him. It was a mistake. He was drunk. He left you to die on the floor, Grace, I said. And the only reason he called the ambulance the next day was because he realized he could use your broken leg to extort $50,000 from me. If he had gotten that money, he would have spent it on his gambling debts, and you would still be lying on that floor the next time he got drunk. I stood up, pulling the tablet back into my bag. The police are going to come here tomorrow to take your statement, I said. You have two choices. You can tell the truth about what happened on Saturday night, testify against your son, and let the state assign you a public guardian who will actually take care of you. I paused, looking down at her. Or you can lie to protect him. And if you do, my lawyer will submit this video as evidence of your complicity in the extortion plot. You will be charged as an accessory to fraud, your pension will be confiscated, and you will spend the rest of your recovery in a state-run prison ward. Grace stared at me, her eyes filled with a deep, hollow horror. She realized, for the first time in her life, that the quiet, polite girl from Unit 402 was gone. Amanda. She whimpered, reaching a trembling hand toward me. Please, we were neighbors. We were, I said, pulling the yellow curtain aside. But neighbors don't try to destroy each other's lives for a quick buck. Sleep well, Grace. I walked out of the ward, the heavy swing doors of the hospital closing behind me with a solid, satisfying thud. The preliminary hearing for the state of Carmoria versus Pierce Higgins was held on a gray, rainy Tuesday morning in November. The courtroom was small, smelling of wet wool, cheap pine disinfectant, and old paper. I sat on the hard wooden bench in the second row, Mr. Cole sitting beside me with his leather briefcase resting on his knees. Pierce was led in by two bailiffs. He was wearing an orange jail jumpsuit, his wrists cuffed in front of him. Looked terrible. His hair was greasy, his face pale and covered in a rough, uneven stubble, and his eyes were dark with a mixture of fear and simmering, impotent rage. When he saw me sitting in the gallery, his jaw tightened, and he mouthed a single silent word, bitch. I didn't flinch. I offered him a calm, polite nod, as if we were meeting in the hallway of our apartment building. His public defender, a young, exhausted-looking woman named Ms. Vance, stood up to address the judge. Your Honor, Ms. Vance began, adjusting her glasses. My client is a working-class man with no prior felony record. He was under immense financial stress due to his mother's sudden medical emergency. While we admit that the volunteer caregiver agreement was poorly conceived, it was born out of a desperate attempt to secure care for an elderly relative. We ask for a reduction in bail and a plea deal for simple misdemeanor fraud. The judge, a stern-faced woman with gray hair pinned back in a tight bun, looked over her spectacles at the prosecution. Does the state have a response? The assistant district attorney, a sharp, middle-aged man named Mr. Miller, stood up. He smiled, a cold, confident expression that made Pierce's lawyer visibly stiffen. Indeed we do, Your Honor, Miller said, reaching into his folder. The state has received new, verified evidence from the victim, Ms. Amanda Koss, which completely refutes the defense's claim of a sudden medical emergency and filial panic. He walked over to the clerk and submitted a flash drive. We have submitted video and audio evidence from a security camera installed at the apartment building on the night of October 14th. The footage shows that the defendant, Pierce Higgins, arrived at the apartment in a state of extreme intoxication, engaged in a violent physical dispute with his mother over her pension money, and caused her to fall and break her hip. A soft, collective gasp echoed through the small gallery. Pierce's head snapped toward the prosecution table, his face draining of all color. Furthermore, Miller continued, his voice echoing clearly in the quiet courtroom, the evidence shows that the defendant locked his injured mother inside the apartment from the outside and left the premises for over 14 hours to attend an illegal gambling establishment. He did not seek medical assistance until the following morning, specifically delaying the call so he could arrange the extortion scheme against Ms. Koss. That's a lie, Pierce screamed, slamming his cuffed hands against the wooden defense table. She's lying. That camera is illegal. You can't use that. Quiet, the judge barked, slamming her gavel down with a sharp, echoing crack. Mr. Higgins, another outburst like that, and you will be removed from this courtroom and held in contempt. Ms. Vance, Pierce's lawyer, looked at the flash drive on the clerk's desk, her face pale. She turned to Pierce, whispering frantically, her expression turning to one of deep, professional disgust. Furthermore, Your Honor, the prosecutor added, dropping his final hammer. We have a signed, notarized deposition from the mother, Grace Higgins, taken at Orenburg General Hospital yesterday. She has fully detailed her son's long history of financial and physical abuse, and has confirmed that she was forced to participate in the extortion plot under threat of violence. Pierce fell back into his chair, as if he had been struck by a physical blow. His eyes were wide, staring blankly at the defense table, his lips trembling. The judge looked at the documents, then down at Pierce with a look of cold, unyielding contempt. In light of the new evidence presented by the state, the judge said, her voice dropping to a freezing register, I am denying bail. The charges against the defendant are officially upgraded to felony elder abuse, felony neglect, grand larceny, and forgery. She slammed her gavel down again. This court is adjourned. The trial date is set for December 12th. As the bailiffs grabbed Pierce's arms to lead him back to the holding cells, he suddenly broke. He began to scream, thrashing against their grip, his eyes locked on me with a wild, venomous desperation. Amanda, you ruined me. You ruined my life. I'll kill you. When I get out, I'll kill you. The bailiffs quickly dragged him through the heavy wooden side doors, his screaming voice fading into the quiet hallways of the courthouse. I stood up, smoothing the front of my trench coat. Well, Mr. Cole said, closing his briefcase with a clean snap. I don't think we'll need to worry about him for a long, long time, Amanda. The minimum sentence for those charges combined is 8 years. Good, I said, looking at the empty doorway where Pierce had been dragged through. He can use that time to study the law. By the middle of December, the snow had settled deep over Orenburg, turning the city into a quiet, frozen landscape of white and gray. The neighborhood group chat, which had once been a swamp of passive-aggressive comments and gossip about my heartlessness, had undergone a massive silent cleansing. The building manager, a man who had previously ignored my complaints about the noisy hallway, had personally come to my apartment with a box of expensive chocolates and a handwritten letter of apology from the neighborhood association. The Community Angel Award, along with its $5,000 grant, had been suspended indefinitely. On Friday afternoon, I walked into the lobby of Parkview Tower. The lobby was warm, decorated with a massive glittering Christmas tree and a soft, low-volume holiday playlist playing through the ceiling speakers. The receptionist, a young woman who had witnessed the entire scene on Friday, looked up as I walked in. She offered me a warm, genuine smile. Good morning, Amanda, she said. Good morning, I replied, stepping toward the elevator. The elevator doors opened, and I found myself riding up to the 4th floor with Brenda. Brenda looked incredibly uncomfortable. She was holding her tablet tightly against her chest, her eyes staring straight at the shiny metal doors, her mouth twitching as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the courage. Brenda, I said, my voice conversational. She flinched, turning to look at me with a nervous, shaky smile. Oh, Amanda. Hi. I was just thinking about you. I saw the article in the Orenburg Herald yesterday about the court sentencing. 8 years, that's, well, justice was served, right? Yes, I said, looking at her with a calm, polite smile. It was. It's amazing what happens when people actually check the facts before they open their mouths. Isn't it? Brenda's face turned a deep, embarrassed pink. Yes, of course. I always knew you were innocent, Amanda. I told everyone in the office we should wait for the police report. The elevator doors slid open with a soft, pleasant chime. I'm sure you did, Brenda, I said, stepping out into the carpeted hallway of our department. Have a great weekend. I walked down the corridor to my desk, set my bag down, and looked out the massive windows at the snow falling gently over the city. The sky was a deep, quiet blue, the winter air crisp and clean. My home was quiet. My job was secure. My reputation was completely intact, and the people who had tried to pull me into the mud were currently sitting in the dark, cold cells of the state penitentiary. I took a slow, deep breath, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop. I had a busy day ahead of me, and for the first time in a long time, there was absolutely nothing standing in my way.